Another settlement has sent word that they need our help. I'll mark it on your map.
Hello lovelies, today we're going to have a bit of a gander at the Fallout Settlers Guide. So I'm currently running a Fallout mini campaign over on Grimstreams. Go and subscribe. And I wanted all of the main options and data available without buying any of the adventures, which I don't really get any mileage out of. So this goes alongside the Wanderer's Handbook, and between the two of them fill out most of the stuff from the more modern Fallout games and make it available to you. This one obviously having a little bit of a focus on settlements, settlement building and so on. So familiar to people who've played Fallout 4, many of us are replaying it now in the wake of the series. And those who play Fallout 76, which has the not settlement building but home base building as part of it. So what do we have in here? Well, weirdly a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily to do with settlements, unfortunately. So for example, in terms of characters, we get the Minutemen and the New California Republic as character options, but they're not exactly settler characters, but I guess they had to put them somewhere. And being a member of the NCR seems like an odd basis for a character, while the Minutemen is much more focused. You know, they were there to help people, whereas the NCR is a culture more than anything else. So that didn't seem particularly fitting. We also have the option to play Protectrons instead of just playing Mr. Handies. Robo Brains, if that's something that tickles your fancy, and it's nice to see the Securitrons from New Vegas, of course, though I'm not sure that it makes sense for them to be a character option necessarily, though there was that one Securitron that was independent, wasn't there? And also synths, which never particularly felt in keeping with the rest of Fallout to me, but you know, it's there for the sake of having the option, I suppose. So it's a bit of a weird grab bag of things in this book, and it's not as settler focused or settlement focused as you might think it would be. The same thing happens with the perks, many of which aren't particularly related to settlers and communities. Many of them are, but there's a lot of other stuff in here, which is kind of symptomatic of the book as a whole. There's a lot of stuff, but it's not necessarily particularly fixated on the topic. So there's a lot of stuff, and it does kind of round out and complete the main book in a similar way to the Wanderer's book did. But it's just not what it sells itself as particularly, and it also tends, like the Wanderer's book, to fall a little bit short of going as far as it could, would, or should, in my opinion. Like, if you're going to have the Wanderer's book, you should have fully rounded out vehicle rules, whereas despite it being one of the main selling points of the book, it's just a handful of pages without much detail. And similarly here, it's not exactly one thing or the other. I mean, you would buy this expecting very fulsome settlement rules that goes over and above and beyond what you might have in Fallout itself, but you don't really get that. So the whole book feels a little bit too cursory. The settlement rules are pretty much as simplistic as they are in Fallout 4. It wouldn't have taken much effort or work to expand beyond what we have in Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 and to add some depth or to create a few D100 or whatever random tables for generating problems beyond simple attacks, internal strife and divisions within settlements and so on, or to allow them to scale up beyond what the computer engine really allows. I think Diamond City is the most fulsome settlement we've ever seen in Fallout, and it still feels really scantily populated. And the less said about Starfield cities, the better, probably. But you would expect it to go beyond, to really tap into the benefits and advantages that a role-playing game has over a computer game to add these things. So, on the one hand, it's too cursory, and then at the same time, it's maybe a little too detailed, especially when it comes to larger settlements. Like, you don't really need a list of every room that is available in a particular settlement, or how many power cables there are spreading from one place to another. It might have been better to approach it on the abstract, in the general, and the particular where necessary. I'd love to have something for settlements that's in the space between Underground's community scores and character-led activism, which I've shamelessly ripped off for many of my own games, and the base building of something like Conspiracy X, or maybe something lighter, more like perhaps Vaesen, or there's a game called Reign, which is about ruling kingdoms and things. You could scale that sort of thing down, but yeah, you neither get one thing nor the other. So it's a basis upon which to build, I suppose. But then you buy something like this to save you the bother of doing it yourself. So I don't know. The rules for companions strike me as a little unnecessary, since you already have a party of players, which obviously you don't have in the computer game. If you were playing this solo, but I don't think there are solo rules for it, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure on that, then maybe companions make more sense. But playing conventionally, you have a group, you have a party, and you can just use standard NPCs for anything else. But I guess the companions that are presented here, rather than in the bestiary section, are at least useful in rounding out the bestiary, even if they're not part of it. It just all seemed a bit unnecessary. The automatron rules are hella useful for building custom robots of your own, something which I definitely need for my Fallout campaign. It's meant for junkers that you put together from spare parts, but you can still use it as a basis for designing new models of robot if you want to introduce new elements, new companies besides Robco, etc., into your games. It gives you an idea of the statistical ranges and options that are available, expands the modifications and so on that you can go to, and allows you to essentially make field repairs by bolting different bits onto robots. So very useful. Equipment wise, again, this is more about being completionist of all the weapons that are found in the computer games, with a bit of an emphasis here on the weirder weapons, the weirder equipment, things like the Cryolator, Broadsider, and so on. So not necessarily things that are going to be super duper useful in most games, but for a sense of completion and maybe some mythical weapons that people know from the computer games and can get member berries about and get excited for. Yeah, useful there. The GM section is less about settlements yet again, and much more about factions via rules for faction reputations and so on. And I'm a bit torn on social rules. It's like, are they necessary? But then you recognise that people's roleplay skills are not necessarily up to the statistics of their characters or the reputations that they might have built up, and so on. I'm always like that about social mechanics, so undecided, but this is again more about factions and groups than it is about settlements necessarily. it might have been more interesting to focus on internal conflicts and struggles for power and that sort of thing if you were going to do that. I mean, it's okay. It just feels settlement adjacent rather than settlement focused necessarily. The best section in the book probably is this segment about building a settlement's identity, which, kind of like the vehicle rules in the Wanderer's Guide, is just a scant handful of pages. But describing how you can determine that settlement's character and appearance from its terroir, if you will, from its sense of place, its purpose, its size, its resources, its defences, and so on, you can come to a general idea of what kind of people live in this settlement, how might their environment have changed or affected them, and so on. So that's interesting and helpful, and probably the best part of the whole book. We round off with some signature characters and some generic NPCs, though they're more fully statted than antagonists normally are. But yeah, that's quite useful and something you can tap into easy enough. So what would I give this book in terms of scores? Well, I mean, the presentation, it's Fallout, so you expect things to be brown always, everywhere, all the time. So the muddiness of the pictures isn't necessarily as bad as it is in, say, Wizards of the Coast's offerings. Yeah, and it's all in keeping, and it's relatively clearly written and laid out and so on. So it's a cut above the average for the sort of upper middle to upper tier of the industry, which I guess Modiphius is in these days. So all in all, I think I'd give it a style score of 4 because it's nicely presented and it's better presented than the market leader, in my not so humble opinion. In terms of substance, I mean, the book suffers again from purporting to be about a particular thing and then not particularly being about that thing. And again, as I mentioned in my previous review, I appreciate the problems that come with dealing with someone's intellectual property and all the checks and so on that you have to go through, and at the same time there's the pressure to include all the things that people expect you to include and so on, but you have to kind of judge it as a product in and of itself. Personally, I think I would rather have seen the Settlers and Wanderers books brought together in a single volume as like the Fallout role-playing game companion or something. I feel like that would have been better value for money, would have potentially stopped some repetition. It wouldn't have suffered from allegedly having these foci to Settlers or Wanderers, and so the extraneous material wouldn't feel extraneous. But it's like you're being told you're being sold one thing and then you pick it up and not so much. That said, the content's great, it's useful, it's just not what it says on the tin. So in terms of substance, a low 3. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. If you're running Fallout and you want a complete set of rules, then you need the Settlers and the Wanderers handbooks along with the core book. But if you're looking for expansive and interesting and innovative settlement rules that are, effective, no, not really. But if you're interested in Fallout and you're going to be playing a reasonable campaign, then yeah, I think you need this and the Wanderers book. Sang. I have a fairly mellow Discord if you want to join us there for a bit of conversation and debate. We have people from all over, really, and for the most part, it's fairly good-natured and peaceful. As long as you come in that kind of spirit, you'll be fine.
Now, Bob, consider this next question very carefully. What is your one purpose in life?
To explode, of course.